vote November. The SDMA is a nonpartisan organization, and we do not endorse or oppose candidates unless they're from the HSUS. And in turn, to make sure policy leaders are educated about issues, remember that voting candidates, HSUS, bad. Okay? Return their donation. These people will vote for you. Alright? And we strive to make sure policies are educated about issues. We make sure members are educated about political issues, and in turn to make our policy leaders educated about issues of concern to those involved in veterinary medicine. We will ask each candidate to provide a short introduction and an opening statement, and then we will proceed with questions that have been previously submitted as well as questions they may have from the floor. Please raise your hand if you have a question. We'll get you to the microphone. So this is how it works. We got the first question. But if you have a question, the microphones are right here. Come and ask it, because this is about us, and I know they want to entertain your questions. So, I think we have a coin flip, so this is how it's going to go. To begin, I will thank Scott Heidepriem and his wife Susan for joining us here tonight, and ask Scott to introduce himself and give his remarks. And then after that, Dennis Dugart will make his opening statement. So, I guess floor is yours. I think it's up to you guys. I think both of you should go out.
Can everybody hear me okay? The last time Dennis and I were in this room with these exact microphones, he had to show me how they work, which he was very kind to do, and I appreciated it. As Dick said, my name is Scott Heidepriem, and I am the Democratic nominee for Governor of South Dakota. I'd like to introduce my wife, Susan. Susan, would you please stand? I was born and raised in Miller, South Dakota, and lived there for 36 years. Listening to Dick's story about his mom and dad reminded me a lot of my own chance to grow up in a small town in a great family. And I'm just a very, very lucky South Dakotan. I lived in Miller for 36 years. After I finished school in Miller, I went down to the U, and I got my law degree, and I came home and worked with my dad for 12 years. And it was while in Miller that Susie and I started our family. Our sons Sam and Pete are 23 and 19. And Susie's about to take them off to college. She's going to take Pete on Saturday and then Sam the following Saturday to graduate school. So it's going to be a bittersweet couple weeks in the Heidepriem household, but I think a lot of you know what that is like. I had the chance to serve in the legislature representing the very rural district and Hyde, Falcon, Speke counties for 8 years, and then Susie and I moved to Sioux Falls in 1992. And in 1992, I left the legislature, and Susie and I worked together to raise our children for the next 14 years during the important years in their lives. And then I came back to the legislature in 2006, where I was elected the minority leader of the Senate. I've held that position for 4 years and am now the nominee for governor. Let's talk a little bit about why we are here. We're here to talk about agriculture, and I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for joining me here. I think these forums are very important so that all South Dakotans can get an idea of the two of us and where we might agree and where we might disagree, so that you can make an informed choice. When I think about veterinary medicine, I have to go back to growing up in Miller and then moving to Washington Springs. Doc Feisner is here, and Dylan Feisner was not only a very dear friend of mine when I was the state's attorney in Gerald County, he actually sat on my very first jury trial in the Gerald County Courthouse. And in spite of that, we remained friends and still are today. And I was just delighted to see Doc here. But going back even different times in Miller, Charlie Seagren is here. And I have to tell you, when I think about vets, in Miller, I always think of people named Merriweather, DeRushi, Seagren, and Hubbard. Those are the vets for us when we were kind of like growing up, but then later on in life. And Merriweather Vet was right there on the east side of Main Street toward the south end. We'd stop in there. Not uncommon to stop in the Merriweather Vet and see what was going on. Those were folks where I don't think they made a distinction between a large animal and a small animal practice. It was an any animal practice. They'd be pulling a calf at 4 in the morning, and they'd be neutering the pet dog at noon, and who knows what the rest of the day. But they worked extremely, extremely hard, and they set a great standard for the rest of us. I always thought it was interesting about the vets in Miller because they had one foot in agriculture and they had one foot on Main Street. They were not only deeply involved in agriculture, but they also had to run a small business. And almost all of you also have that obligation and that burden, and it's been kind of tough in the last couple of years, and I'm hoping that we're going to get the chance to talk about that. But those were the days in Miller and growing up, but what are we facing today in veterinary medicine? We're looking at an average death of $120,000 for a graduate, from Iowa State anyway, and I assume that that's fairly standard. We're looking at an increasing burden for those folks to come to a place like South Dakota and practice, especially large animal. In 2008, there were 2,600 graduates across the country, 15% of whom were large animal vets. So that kind of tells the story of the difficulty that we have in South Dakota. I think the last statistics I had were that 16 counties that had tens of thousands of animals were without a resident veterinarian at all. So that sort of presents the challenge of what we're facing. One of the big issues, as I look at it, I see an issue about availability for large animal vets throughout South Dakota. There isn't any question about the importance of animal agriculture to our state and its economic well-being, so we have to be about that. Jennifer and I were talking about a bill in the 2009 legislative session, which would have expanded the tuition program and extended it beyond Iowa State. That was a bill that unfortunately got caught up in the 2009 legislature where we were really, really short of money, and so we couldn't pass it. But as I said to Jennifer, I think we need to revisit it. The second is the threat from those who are hostile to the whole idea of the animal industry, whether it's PETA or whoever else, and using any sort of claims about small animals against large animal providers about inhumane treatment. I always get a kick out of that because Charlie Seagren and I remember days back when we worked for the Jennings. I was kind of a grunt farmhand for the Jennings Black Angus folks, for Ted and then for Ronnie. But we would dehorn cattle all the time out there. I can't even remember how many I did. And the idea that that was inhumane treatment was crazy. What's inhumane is when you don't dehorn cattle and you leave them in the pen with one another. I mean, that's it. There has to be a certain recognition of what animal agricultural industry is really about. And I think we need to fight for those values and fight for those really common sense answers to the animal industry. And then finally is the role of small business people, all of you in that role. And we face really big challenges in South Dakota. This is an area where the Lieutenant Governor and I have disagreed fairly clearly. It's our view that in South Dakota we need to do a better job of getting our receipts and our expenditures in sync, because they aren't and they have not been for a number of years. We're facing a large budget deficit in the coming year of $107 million. He will tell you it's a different number, but it's a large number regardless of his version or mine, and the next governor will inherit that problem. And it's a serious, serious problem, and we have to get that fiscal house in order before we can look at the things that we're very interested in. And in South Dakota, that means investing in education. That means investing in infrastructure. Those are the two things that I'm really caring deeply about in this campaign, and I'm anxious to talk to you about them. So I have a plan to fix the fiscal problems we have and then to invest in education and infrastructure. I'm going to conclude now and just tell you, I want to just give you an image of one thing, and then I'll return to it in closing. In the governor's office in the Capitol building in Pierre, there is a conference room, and in that conference room there is a table. And really the question is, who do you want to be around that table in making the decisions for the next 4 years of the state of South Dakota? We have 230,000 registered Republicans. We have 200,000 registered Democrats, and we have 85,000 registered Independents. The question is whether all of those folks should be represented around that table. I want to talk a little bit more about that in my conclusion. But for now, I will stop and turn the microphone over to Lieutenant Governor Gubernatorial.
Thank you. Well, I can see the excitement in your faces after a full meal and a long